What's going on, you loyal listeners? Thank you for tuning in to the L Squared podcast. I'm your host here, Luke Larson, and joining me today, as per the unusual, making his L Squared debut, a new loyal listener who is a loyal listener, but he's also lovely and loquacious, and he will be assisting me in leisurely launching you into levity. Friend of the show, my good pal, Jack Paynard.
Thanks for having me on, man. Long-time loyal listener, first-time caller.
Here with some hot takes.
Hot as ever.
Potentially new co-host. We'll see. Again.
We're still negotiating salary. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's right. Because I got a lot of dead cat money with old legs. At this point, I'm invested, fiscally enough that it's going to be tough to move on. But
almost a burden, but I'm here to free you.
Thank you for that. Well, in doing so, I brought Jack on because he and I attended the Tribeca Film Festival this year, and got to see one of my most anticipated movies of the year, by director Josh Rubin. His follow-up to Scare Me, which you loyal listeners know, made my top 10 of the year last year, which I loved. His new film, Werewolves Within, which was a werewolf whodunit. And say no more for me. I'm just all the way in. And I would read you the synopsis, but there really isn't much of one. It just says feature adaptation of the video game where werewolves attack a small town. And that's, basically good enough.
All you had to do to get Luke on board was say Josh Rubin, werewolves, and he was like, whatever, buy me a ticket. I'm in, let's go.
I'm there. And loyal listeners, we're talking about a movie before it comes out. This hasn't even come out yet. It's going to come out July 2nd.
Which says something about the movie as well as us as very important people.
Yeah, mainly Jack. The one time it's ever happened when Jack was here. So I think it says more about you. But no, I was so excited to see it, and I'm excited to talk about it. So this falls in the genre of a whodunit, which I actually have pulled up here to read to you guys.
Actual Merriam-Webster definition of whodunit. Oh yeah.
So
real thesis paper energy going on here.
It's a noun. Whoa. Buckle up. It's a story or play about a murder in which the identity of the murderer is not revealed until the end. Which, okay, that's fine. That checks out. But that can kind of leave some gray area. Because when I think of a whodunit, I don't know about you, Jack, but I think of usually a bottleneck situation where everybody's in a small area and something happens, usually a murder, and everybody's a suspect, and every single person you look into, and you don't reveal it till the end. But if you just say something happens, you don't reveal it to the end, that could be any thriller or any noir.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not buying that.
A reveal a whodunit does not make.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think.
I kind
of. So are you a fan of whodunits in general?
Just in general, sure. I mean, I think whodunits are fairly vague and broad in general. So it's hard to say exactly what is a whodunit beyond a Agatha Christie novel or something like that. But honestly, as far as Werewolves Within is concerned, as far as it being considered a whodunit, it's kind of funny in the fact of it being a whodunit. It's so unconventional in so many of the ways it sets itself up, and we'll get into that in a second. But it I don't know, it kind of pushes the envelope on a lot of genres of I don't really know if it's this kind of genre, but I guess we're going with this. And I think that was a real talent of Josh Rubin in directing this. He obviously had a vision for a story, taking it from a video game, which in and of itself is a hard enough task, taking something that many major studios have failed at, and Werewolves Within, it's how much material do you really have to go with here, and turning it into something that's really creative that kind of bounces from genre to genre. And I don't know, it kept me on my toes the entire time, because I did hear it described as a whodunit, but it never really finished that way for me.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I agree. It definitely kept me on my toes the whole time as well. And I think that's kind of a hallmark of a whodunit too. Like when I feel like it's a whodunit, it's like I want to be like, okay, I don't know who done it the whole time, you know, and looking around. But I agree. I love I mean, first of all, obviously I'm a huge fan of Josh Rubin, but just like, I love that it's just so like, it was such a creative way to do it. It's it's a werewolf story. And, you know, I guess I'm the one who keeps calling it a whodunit. Maybe nobody else is. Maybe I'm the only one. But it feels like that to me. And I just love that idea, you know, just that as a concept of a werewolf movie, and then not knowing who the werewolf is just brilliant to me. And another thing is that, like, so this also, if you haven't listened to my top 10 films of 2020, you should, because I'm going to make another callback to it. But another movie that made my list was The Wolf of Snow Hollow, which was a werewolf movie that came out last year. So you guys, and I watched The Wolf Man from 1941 every year. So, like, guys, I have a type, you know. But like, the thing is, that's the thing, is that there aren't a lot of great werewolf movies, in my opinion, you know. And I just, for whatever reason, I've always loved werewolves. And so, like, they've always been interesting to me. I've always loved the mythology and the lore, but like, there aren't a lot of great werewolf movies. And I'm like always searching for a good one. And I always, you know, you hear like, oh, there was this one that came out in the 80s and like, it's actually really good and it holds up. And you're like, oh, okay. And then I watch it and I'm like, oh, no, it doesn't do it for me. But I'm just like, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I'm always like holding out hope that, oh, this is going to be like a cool new werewolf movie, like a new take on it that I haven't seen before. Because really, it's like, what do we have? Like, we have, in my opinion, The Wolf Man, and then we have like an American Werewolf in London.
Funny thing with American Werewolf in London, I feel like that draws a lot of parallels with Werewolves Within. I feel like there's a ton of comparisons between the two films. I was describing the film to my cousin, and he was like, oh yeah, that sounds just like American Werewolf in London, you know. And the same idea of, it's less about werewolves themselves as much as it is like people reacting to werewolves to a certain degree. And like the concept of like monster inside versus monster around us. You know, the real werewolf was society, but in a much more cleanly put, clever, and inviting way.
And funny.
Oh my gosh, it was a funny film. The lead, Finn, the character Finn, had me cracking up the entire time. He was such a refreshing take on this lead character protagonist in a gritty reality of, instead of being this kind of tough as nails, get to it attitude that you'd see in a lot of werewolf hunters or people facing the supernatural, you have a park ranger who uses phrases like golly gosh, trying to face up against this cold hard reality that he's in. And it's hysterical. The joke never gets old. I was expecting to get really tired of this character in the first introduction. I never got tired of him. I kept on wanting to see more, and it was really unexpected.
Yes, I agree. I love such a great character opening of when he's on the way and he's listening to basically a self-help tape of how to be like more assertive.
It was phenomenal.
It's so perfect. It's just like, yes. And then he's in this weird place where he just does it. He's very clearly codependent in this weird relationship, and he doesn't know. It's just so perfect to be like, oh god, man, like, come on.
He's so easy to push around, but I don't know, Sam Richardson did a great job of portraying this character of like, he has limits, he has boundaries, and he has certain buttons, but it takes a very long time to hit these buttons, comedically long time to hit these buttons, and he's so okay with everything. He's almost a pushover, but he's likable. And I don't know, it kept on going in a really good direction with that. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, because it's a good point, because you think the switch is going to flip at some point, and you think like, okay, this is the time where he turns on the badass, you know, flip, and he goes after, but it never really gets there in a good way. You know, he becomes more confident as it goes, and he does take charge, and people respect him, but he does it his own way. You know, he doesn't like, I love that he didn't like change who he was. It wasn't like a betrayal of who he is morally as the character that they've set up. You know, it was just like an evolution of where he started from. It. Yeah, Sam Richardson did a great job. Some other people in it. The AT&T girl, Melania.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Mantrub. I think I'm saying that right. It was great. I had no idea. Like, I thought she was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was funny just because like she seemed like such a trope at the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
Where her character was going around and it felt almost too easy. It was like kind of boring and like, oh, whatever. And her character grew on me so much during the entire film. I just, you know, it went from a like, oh, she feels like such a stereotype, you know, like whatever kind of thing. And the character kept on growing on me. And I realized that that's what happened to me with a lot of these characters, where the character is introduced and they are a stereotype. They really are. Yeah. This movie does such a great job with stereotypes that instead of leaning into them in a negative way, they take them and they make them into a really fun and interesting character, despite being so extreme in their viewpoints, their characteristics, their mannerisms, anything like that. It never got tired, which is weird. And that's really rare, even for like studio films. I feel like if a studio film is parodying a stereotype, they still do it in a really like kitschy, annoying way of like, oh, you know that we're in on the joke, you're in on the joke, ha ha ha, whatever, who cares? But Ruben does a really good job of taking these characters, embracing the stereotype while using it in a way that furthers the plot of the film.
Totally. Absolutely. And that's another good point you bring up, Jack. A lot of these character introductions at the beginning, for sure, you are just like, wow, this is very like, it's a very cardboard cutout portrayal of this type of person, you know, and you think like, okay, well, they aren't going to have any depth, which makes you feel like, well, I don't care about any of these people, you know, I don't care if any of these people die.
Which is the horror movie trope.
Yeah, it totally is. So you buy into it,
right?
And then all of a sudden they're all stuck together, and you just see like slowly, you know, things start turning, and you're sort of like, oh, you really feel like, you kind of feel like you're there with them, like, ah, shit, we're all in it. Like, it would be so much easier if everybody would have just stayed in their houses and they could have just been the two-dimensional caricatures that we thought they were, and they could all have their different viewpoints and stay away. But then all of a sudden, when you're all trapped in the same lodge together, then all of a sudden it's like, well, shit, now we have to like, now we have to work together because something's going on, you know, and so now we have to, which sounds basic, but really it worked so well, because it's like the trailer shows like, oh, you know, who's packing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody's packing. Like, oh shit! They're like, yep, we're doing a sleepover, but with guns.
Yeah,
it was so good.
It did such a good job of taking these horror movie tropes, and where other Hollywood films would kind of deject them and push them away of like, oh, ha ha ha, we're making fun of that because we're above that. This film kind of embraces them in a certain way and adopts them, and it works. Like, Luke, how spoiler are we allowed to get on this film?
Yeah, so I think that we probably should have talked about this before we started recording.
We probably should have.
That's my fault. Well, let's bring the loyal listeners behind the curtain. I would say, since it's kind of a whodunit and it hasn't come out yet, we'll kind of like obviously save the big spoiler.
Yeah, no big spoilers. Yeah,
but otherwise, I don't care.
Okay. At one point, they bag up all the guns and basically like throw them away. Like they have an instance where they throw away their guns, and you look at that and you think, I've seen this in every slasher film where everybody takes every means of survival and basically chucks it out the window, and it's used as a plot device to further like carnage and chaos and everything like that. And this, it's so funny. Like it makes sense the way that they're like bringing their train of logic to this conclusion, and then you see them doing, you're like, what are they doing? Are you
You're like,
kidding
wait,
me?
what? Because
Wait,
yeah, it's
what?
like I don't want to be. You're like, yeah, I don't want to be sleeping in a house full of these idiots that all just are trigger happy. Like they're all like, oh yeah, let's point me at them, and you're like, okay, well, you know what? No, nobody gets guns. All right, let's take them all away, and then you lock them away, and then yeah, you think like, ah, shit, now we don't have any guns. You know,
Absolutely,
like,
yeah.
I love that.
It's taking these tropes and just like it's bringing them to their full potential in a way of like accepting them rather than rejecting them. I think that's so clever. I think Ruben does a great job of, because he knows his horror. He obviously knows his horror. It's so evident in the way that he made this film. He knows how to make a good horror film, that he's able to take something and basically go the extra mile with it. It's almost like post satire kind of. And that sounds so pretentious when I say it out loud, but
yeah, it's like it's yeah, you're right. Like the best satire have such a high regard and love for what they're inspired by or parroting or whatever. But this is, it's like, you're right. It's both. It's like you could call it a satire, which it kind of is, but it also lives within that world too, and those rules, similar to like, Austin Powers, mocking James Bond, but taking it to a different level where it's like, yeah, you could call that a spoof or a satire, but it's also like clearly they have this love of that of that genre where you can add to it and sort of like through those, kind of go in different places that you wouldn't be able to go through those other ones. Because if you have like, let's say, like we were talking about the leading man, Sam Richardson.
Yep.
Most leading men in this would just be like the guy who's an alcoholic and he's hard edged and he's direct and he just takes control, and he knows what he wants, what he's doing. And that's, and he just takes control. But so then when you have that, you don't get the kind of character motivations and the struggles that we got in this, where Sam Richardson isn't really confident in himself and is very like polite and thinks about what other people are feeling and doesn't want to like, rock the boat or anything. And so you get a lot more like character friction and a lot more of these subtle like interactions that you wouldn't get in a normal one, which you could say is satire, but it's also like another way to look at it. Like we were saying, it's just like expanding on it and taking it in different ways that we haven't seen,
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that Sam Richardson's character is such a wet noodle throughout the entire thing, like he's such a pushover the entire time. Like the fact it makes his character stronger, but also allows the supporting cast to shine in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like there's stereotypes, like I said before, but I mean, they're fun, they're interesting, they're weird, they're crazy. And it's endearing in a way that like halfway through the film, I was thinking these characters are kind of annoying and like bad stereotypes to a certain degree. And there was a certain point where I connected with them and I thought, oh man, I actually kind of care about them because of how weird they are.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't mean I like them. It doesn't mean that I'm empathizing with them or rooting for them, but I like watching them because it's just so weird.
You're right. No, that's a good point, because when Sam Richardson's character is like kind of having empathy or like, common courtesy or just trying to like, respect them as a person and deal with them, it does humanize him. He's not just the cynical like Jim character from The Office who mugs to character and like, oh, look at these idiots, But when he's like, no, all right, I know, all right, well, we, okay, I don't know, we gotta get through this. It does make you sit back and be like, yeah, because we all this is so dumb to say, but we all have people in our lives that we don't like to deal with and that we have to deal with, and it's just a part of living life. And so it does kind of breathe, get some fresh air in there. And some of these characters that we were saying, like George Basil, I love George Basil. So I didn't realize he was in this, or I forgot until I started watching. I'm like, yeah, fucking George Basil. I love that guy. I just love when he pops up in anything. And all these guys, Michael Chernus was great. The other one that stood out to me was Michaela Watkins. Michaela Watkins kills me in like everything she's in. She was the one who made like the little soap statue, you know?
Oh yeah.
She's one of those like God, that's so funny. And then you're like, wait, who is that? Or like, who have I seen her in? You know, she's like one of those people.
Yeah.
But God, she freaking just kills me every time.
Yeah.
But that is kind of the strength of this movie too, is just having all those unique characters, which are annoying and they're like meant to be, you know. But as it goes along, it just kind of, I just remembered when it opens on on a Mr. Rogers quote, a Fred Rogers quote, like in like a horror movie, like the font slowly fades in.
Yes.
And it's like, you know, whatever, be a good neighbor, whatever it is. And then it comes up. Fred Rogers. Oh, that was so funny.
It's clever. Yeah, it's funny. And it ties into the themes of the film really, really well, because like as much as you're saying you love werewolf films, and I definitely enjoy werewolf films in a lot of ways, it's kind of not a werewolf film. Like it kind of is, kind of isn't, because it really is about community in so many different ways. And it's got a lot of like, it's clever social commentary. I feel like I wasn't beaten over the head with a message while enjoying a film that's obviously a strong homage to horror and has a lot of really great horror comedy elements.
Yeah. And it definitely felt like we were going to get beat over the head.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yes.
You know, at the beginning, you're like, all right, I get it. You know, it's all just be nicer to each other, you know. Okay.
Yeah.
But no, it navigated it very well. And there's one thing I really want to say, but I'm not going to say it because it's a bit of a spoiler.
Okay.
But I'll talk to you after. But
sure.
I think that, you know, that makes me think again of The Wolf of Snow Hollow, which I'm just going to keep saying until more people go see it, I guess. But like that one, you could say is maybe not really a werewolf movie either.
Okay.
Like it is, but when you watch it, you're like, well, it could. If somebody said that's not a werewolf movie, I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, you're crazy. But that's kind of what I'm just now realizing live here is that, well, maybe that's like the evolution of the genre, where me being a werewolf fan that'll go out of my way to see a werewolf movie, maybe like the evolution of them is like maybe that. You know, we've seen plenty of times where people attempted to do that genre and it didn't work out. And so now it's like subverting the genre and adding new things to it that we haven't seen. And that kind of, maybe a werewolf movie works the best when it's maybe not totally a werewolf movie. Like maybe a werewolf movie on its own isn't, you know, necessarily great. Cause like, if I'll point again to The Wolfman from 1941 in black and white, Lon Chaney Jr., which I love. And there's one sequence in it that doesn't really hold up. And he kind of stalks this lady and it was the 40s and it was a little bit like, you know, he may have been spying on her through her window and then went and creeped on her and, you know, whatever. It's, you know,
whatever,
you know, well, like we all do, you know, like we all continue to do every day. And it's fine. And we should be able to.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. Yeah. Women are less than us. Jack agrees. You know.
You know, Luke, I gotta go.
No, stay here. You will sit there and agree with me. Your face will be next to mine. This whole time. But that movie, to me, is so great because like they spend a lot of time in his father saying like this is lycanthropy, which is like that mental disorder where you think that you're becoming a wolf at night, you know, but you're really not. And he's like scared because he blacks out and has these visions. And so for a while you are kind of like, I don't know. You're sort of like, I don't know if this is actually happening or not. And that's just like the perfect trope to put out there, you know? So like that works because it isn't just like, oh, yep, this guy turns into a wolf and he kills people and then that's it. And that's real scary. But it's more like him dealing with the fact that, yeah, it's the werewolf within, of him like being like, I'm afraid that I'm this beast, but yet, you know, it could just all be in my mind, you know. So
Sure.
I don't know how I got down that rabbit hole.
No, it's a good rabbit hole, and it ties into the film really well. Where it's, I was annoyed at first with the film, with the first like half hour, 40 minutes or so, where the movie's called Werewolves Within. There is obviously a werewolf. Like, come on, guys, it's a werewolf.
Yeah.
And like they're beating around the bush so long of like, is it a werewolf? Is it a werewolf? I was getting peeved, where I was frustrated, like, okay, guys, just tell us it's a werewolf. Like, just get to it. It's a werewolf. Oh, crazy. It's a werewolf. Just go to the werewolves. And after a while, I started liking that they weren't doing that, because it fit in with the theme well, like just from a technical aspect, the boring technical stuff, good theme, good character development, good setup, good usage of budget. But it also, like, it was funny. It got funny after a while.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the recurring joke with this film, where it starts with stuff that I think, oh my gosh, that's so annoying. Oh my gosh, that feels juvenile. That feels amateur. And then like the third time they do it, I'm like, okay, that is kind of funny.
Like,
okay, that is funny. Because like, I don't know, instead of doing this kind of crappy studio approach to in jokes with the audience of like, haha, we're a studio and we're in on the joke with you. Like, I don't know, I feel like the film is able to be on our level, is able to do this, like with the jump scares. This film does so many jump scares. And at first I was so annoyed of like, oh my gosh, guys, it is 2021 and we're still doing jump scares. Stop doing these. This is so annoying. And then like midway through the film, they got to this absurdist level of jump scares where every 2 minutes there's a jump scare. And the film obviously knows that we're annoyed about it. And it's so funny.
Yeah.
Like at one point, Finn wakes up from a nap because he hears screaming. He goes upstairs, he turns, and there's one of the characters, jump scare. And he turns around and there's another character, jump scare. And it has the music for it and everything. It's so funny.
Yeah.
I was cracking up. It was such a good idea of what they were doing with that.
Yeah, because it is like subverting the genre in a way where that's a good example of like, they're like, oh, you like, yep, here you go. Oh, now you think you know what's happening. And they're like, yep, again. And then it gets to a point where like, you're like, yeah, it's like, okay, do they have to be doing this on purpose, right? Like at first you're like, come on, guys, like we could do better than that. But then that's all part of the joke, the whole joke is that it is a hat on a hat, and these are all cliches, but yet they're not. Like they're using cliches to go around and to not be cliche.
Yeah,
which is it's a hard tightrope to walk. And I think that this could I think if you I worry that when people see it, they might toward the end might not get that was like the point, is just that there's a lot of these, but so I did some research for this,
please,
about the game, because I didn't realize it was based on a game.
Yeah.
And
so it's Ubisoft in the opening credits, which is so weird.
And you're like, oh, this is kind of strange.
Yeah.
So I have some info here on it. So here's the description of, it's called Werewolves Within, and it's a VR game, which stands for virtual reality.
Whoa.
Mind blown.
I need to explain this to somebody.
Yeah, give me a minute. I need to wrestle with that. So after several attacks on townsfolk, the medieval village of Gallows Town has had enough. With a special guidebook in hand, players congregate and vote to eliminate any and all possible werewolves hiding disguised in the village. Players utilize specific roles and abilities and the power of persuasion to assess, deduce, and win the round. Werewolves Within is a fast-paced game of hidden roles and social deduction for 5 to 8 players. In one game, a player might be a villager trying the hardest to cleanse the town of werewolves, while minutes later they could be the werewolf lying and betraying friends in order to survive. Blah, blah, blah. So it seems like this is basically just a VR version of like the werewolf game. Have you
Ultimate
played that
Werewolf?
game?
Yes, many times.
So good. So which is even better, because I play werewolf I have a loyal listeners, you know, someday maybe you'll be lucky enough to get an invite, but I host a Halloween party every year.
Yo,
And that's what we do. We play a big game, you know, a bunch of games of
werewolf.
werewolf, which is so
Yeah.
much fun. Or like assassin for some people. And I think there's like mafia. It's all like the same thing. There's like different
Point of
versions.
order. It's the same game.
It's all the same. Yeah.
It's the same exact game over and over.
Which like makes me like this even more, that I'm like, oh, okay. So that like makes, and it's really like, I mean, kudos just from a business aspect to Josh Rubin to like get Ubisoft to put up money for this, which is great.
Honestly.
And then like, because this is like best case scenario, because that is just, you could do anything you want. There's no story there, you know. To say it's based on a game is just like based on this old concept of just like who's the werewolf, and so you can do basically anything you want. So it's very close to just like almost an original film, but yet like saying it's based on the game, and then, you know, having that whatever is like, man, good for you.
Honestly, like to a certain degree, when I was watching this film, like within the first 40 minutes, it would have been just as easy to say, like, you could have made The Notebook and just said one of the characters is a werewolf and have it at the same werewolf relevance as Werewolves within the first like 40 to 50 minutes. And it's funny, you know, like, it's not just annoying or obnoxious or like, oh, this is a cash grab from Ubisoft, but, you know, the movie's nothing like the game. It really isn't.
No. Yeah.
But good on Ubisoft for figuring out that like everybody's going to look up Werewolves Within who's seen the film because of this.
Right.
And I'm interested in playing Werewolves Within now. I didn't know what Werewolves Within before watching this film. It's a great move on both ends. They got free promotion. Ubisoft got free promotion.
Yeah.
It's smart. It's a really good idea.
I agree. So Werewolves Within comes out July 2nd, so next weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And which is a weird time for this. It's like it's all snowy, and it's like this should be like a Halloween release, you know, but that's fine. It's coming out in July, and but theaters are opening back up. You know, people are going out to see.
Ow, ow, woo.
That was almost a howl. Are you a werewolf?
Just within. Just
within. That's all. Don't worry. Okay,
it'll only come out later. That's fine.
Yeah, there's no full moon, I don't think. But you know, I think that honestly, like, I obviously think everybody should go see it. But seeing it in the theater, I think is super fun, especially for a whodunit. You know, when Knives Out came out, that was like probably the last big budget whodunit that's come out.
For sure.
You know, it was like that, and then the Murder on the Orient Express, and then it was like there hadn't been a whodunit for a long time in that way of what I think of a whodunit.
Yeah.
So, but when Knives Out was out, I loved it. I still love it. I've watched it a bunch of times, and one of the things I liked about it being out in theaters was when people would ask me like, we're thinking about going to a movie, what should we see? I'm like, go see Knives Out, because like it's fun, like it keeps you engaged, you know. It's fun to try and figure out who you think the murderer is. There's like there's thrilling, you know, that movie is, you know, there's funny parts of it, and it's just a fun mystery. And so like to me, like whodunits are so much fun. And I love it. And so like just seeing in a theater seems great. I'm gonna go see it in the theater again, and so I'm just excited for it to come out, you know, and for people to be able to go see it, and I hope you guys do.
Yeah, honestly, it's definitely one that's it's a weird take for a first film back from quarantine, truth be told, but it's one that'll like whet your appetite for a lot of horror films, for a lot of mystery type films, because it really does act as, this sounds pretentious, and I pray you forgive me before I say
it wouldn't be the first time.
It feels kind of like a next step, like an early next step for horror in a lot of ways, of we're beyond the, oh yeah, we're in on the joke horror, like I've said so many times on the show already, but it's we're in on the joke, but we love the joke. We're in on the trope, but the trope is something that we actually want to use instead of just like stepping on the trope. And I can't say that I've seen that from a lot of modern horror films. I feel like a lot of modern horror films are always trying to subvert. They're always trying to surprise. And this one leans into the predictability. They bite hard on the joke already. You know the trope already. And we're going to do it twice as hard.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be appealing to a lot of people in that way. It's not appealing to like a lot of old time, probably hardcore horror fans who say, you're just doing the joke that's so lazy. But I actually think it's a lot harder to make something like that work. And Josh Rubin did a great job of making that work. I couldn't believe I was laughing at some of this stuff. It was so hard to like think of, why am I laughing at this? But it worked really, really well.
Yeah, it really did. And, you know, speaking of modern horror, the last episode we did was on the Conjuring universe, the Conjureverse. And so we watched a bunch of those, and James Wan kind of revamped the 2010s into being like one of the best decades for horror ever. But
absolutely, yes.
I mean, you talk about like leaning into the genre and doing the genre because you love it. Like The Conjuring was definitely like, it was like, okay, this is like your classic horror film, and for the most part, like you kind of know what's coming, but you love it, and it's still scary. Yes. and it just works so well. So it's kind of like a cliche is a cliche, but if you do it well, then you don't even think about it, you know, being a cliche. But sure. the thing about horror that, you know, horror's kind of come to now that Old Legs and I talk about all the time, which is getting a little bit annoying, is that the pendulum has swung so far away from like slashers that we've gone past the James Wan stuff and into like, you know, a lot more, you know, art house came in and we were all like, oh, this is great. We're getting all these, you know, Blumhouse, you know, it's like, oh, this is great. But then it kind of swung past where now it's like, I've seen a bunch of horror films that we call that Old Legs and I have penned allegorer.
Yeah.
Allegories. Like, because now there've been a few where it's like, you know, we talked about Relic, where it's like, oh, this is this creepy, like, you know, it's very atmospheric and you're in it and it's creepy and you're like, oh, what's going on? And then, oh, the ending is just that, you know, it's actually about old age. And at first you're like, oh, okay. But then you're like, yeah, okay. You know, it's just, I've seen it so many times that now you're just kind of like, I don't care. There was one that was on Netflix. I think it's called His House that I saw.
I haven't seen it.
And it's like about these African immigrants that immigrated to London, I think. And then like this little like
I've heard of this. Yes.
Okay. So like I liked it kind of until the ending, until I realized like, oh shit, this is an allegory. Because it's basically like, it's creepy and they're in this weird haunted house and there's kind of like demons, but then it ends up just being like, oh, this is just an allegory for your past catching up with you. Like that was what was the scary thing the whole time. You know,
the real demon was the people we met along the way.
Pretty much, yeah. And so like, so it's weird to say that a movie that's like that have so many hats on hats like feels refreshing in that way, because it's gotten for me to the point to be like, okay, yeah, another like, oh, it was all just a thing, you know, oh, it was all a big twist and none of it, you know, whatever. But yeah, so loyal listeners, go out, flood the theaters. I'd say go see Werewolves Within, because it's super fun, and that's the best part for me, is like, you don't have to, for me, a whodunit's like a movie that you don't have to be in any kind of mood for, and you just throw it on and you sit back and you just let it go. My favorite is Clue. Have you seen Clue?
Yeah. Yep.
I love Clue, and it's great to me because it's like you can just put it on at any time. I can just throw it on anytime it rains. I want to watch Clue, and you just sit down. And, you know, there's, you know, famously the 4 different endings, you know, with different characters doing it, which is also
such a good idea.
Such a good idea. Yeah. Absolutely. Also based on a game.
Yeah. Based on a game.
Wow.
Maybe we're tapping into something that goes a little bit deeper than we think, Luke.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe this whole podcast is all just an allegory.
Hang on, I'm gonna go make a string board and start connecting things around this room in a really haphazard way.
Then we'll finally get to the bottom of it all. Well,
yeah.
Thank you, Jack.
Oh my gosh.
For coming on and talking about it. And loyal listeners, go out and see it. Let us know what you thought about it.
Yeah.
You could go ahead.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, just so there's going to be so many films to consider going to see when the pandemic has lifted and theaters are opening back up. And Werewolves Within makes a really strong case, not just because it's this entire idea of like, one, it's a horror film in July and please God, make these things float. Yeah. But it's also just the fact that this film feels so earnest in its approach to horror. Like, it's obvious that they like this stuff. It's obvious that they're trying really hard with it on maybe what may seem like a low budget at times that they use in a clever way or anything like that. But oh my gosh, it's just like, it's a film that just feels worth supporting. Yeah. Josh Rubin's stuff is always from the heart in a lot of ways. It's obviously he likes this stuff, and I don't know, it just works in so many ways that it shouldn't. It's worth putting your money towards. It's worth supporting people like this.
Totally agree. And his big thing is he wants to remake Darkman.
I didn't know this. Are you kidding me?
That's like his big goal.
Oh my gosh.
About all the time. And like, how perfect is that?
Josh Rubin, take my money. If you're listening to this, Venmo request me to take all of my money.
Please. I know. Like, wow, how perfect is that? So
I don't need to pay rent. Just take my money.
Ever again. Yeah. I'll sell everything I own. You can have it. So loyal listeners, we got to make this happen. We got to
throw money at him.
We got to throw money at him. We need this to happen. So go out and see it.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
So let's manifest it, guys.
Please.
So let me know that when you go see it so we can get our freaking Darkman remake. You can find me on Twitter at LukeLarson89. Find this podcast at L Squared Podcast on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find us on podcast, on Facebook at L2 Podcast. You
find me on podcast.
Find me on podcast. Listen now, please. Thank you. Yeah, you can get this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. Give us a follow. And Jack, thanks again so much for coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure, man. This is great.
And yeah, let us know what you thought. And until next time.